All right. Welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. This is our normal Friday with just me today. What I love about today's podcast, much like Monday's podcast with Thomas Dimitrov, is that we have stuff to talk about in the NFL. This is the dead time is over. We are going to have a lot of fun today. There's a couple things that we're going to discuss, kind of that boilerplate stuff, the Hall of Fame game that played last night, as well as some league news, which has been pretty substantial today, both with the New Orleans Saints, Kansas City Chiefs, and then the Chicago Bears. And then I'm going to do an Immaculate Grid because, frankly, I'm super stoked out about the Immaculate Grid. And I've had a lot of fun playing them. People have asked me about them on air. So I'm going to go ahead and do one of those. But firstly, I'm going to just, start with a little bit of the league news. This has been a very rich day as far as league news, starting with last night with the Hall of Fame game between the Browns and the New York Football Jets. The Browns came back and won, which is funny because the Jets were they opened, I think, a couple points underdogs in the game. Got bet out, right? Because there was a lot of talk about the Browns not necessarily playing a lot of their players. And so then the Jets ended up closing about 1.5 point favorites, minus 115, minus all the way up to like minus 130, 135 on the money line. And if you took the first half of that, of course, you did really well with the Jets getting out to a 13-0 lead. But the Browns came back and won. So, and the funny thing is, and this is important, this is why, if you are going to bet, closing line value is important. But the total that started at like in the 38.5, they got bet down to 33.5. If you took that early number, of course, you won. If you took that late number as an under in a preseason game, you ended up losing, which is no fun for anybody. But yeah, to me, when I looked at that game, there was only a few storylines. I mean, Zach Wilson kind of looked how Zach Wilson looks. He tried to scramble for a first down, fell down. He did have a really good pass down the sideline for a completion. In the first quarter, he was replaced then by Tim Boyle, and then Strebler, and there really wasn't a ton of offense after Zach Wilson left. The Browns, Kellen Mond looked every bit the Kellen Mond that he has been for the Minnesota Vikings, what got him released after just one season in the purple last year. But then Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who had quite a bit. He had some experience, obviously, from UCLA. He started, I believe he was the starting quarterback in Chip's first season. And so he's been there every single year. He looked like a very experienced quarterback last night. And it was fun to see. He was very efficient. I was a fan of the block he made. Even I think when you look at Cleveland, obviously with Deshaun Watson making everything he's making, and them being kind of a spend and prorate team, having a backup quarterback who is effective while also not costing anything is a very good thing. DeJuan Jones, the right tackle for Cleveland, previously of Ohio State, he looked the part too. 74 snaps from PFF, 0 pressures allowed. So a very impressive performance by him. Beat Gamer 99, one of our loyal listeners here. Zach Wilson looked like Zach Wilson, didn't seem any different. Yeah, I mean, it's a preseason game against a bunch of backups. He didn't look terrible, but he did not also light the place on fire. Mojal, first preseason loss for Robert Saleh as the head coach of the Jets. Very much so. That one, again, you don't learn a ton from those games, and we're not going to have any other games for another week or so, unless you count the CFL. But we did get a taste of football last night. It was a lot of fun. Second thing to talk about, and it's pretty interesting. Beat Gamer, by the way, giving out some betting advice here. The Ravens money line in the preseason, they haven't won or they haven't lost in forever. I do think that hopefully that doesn't get more players injured or something as a result of trying to win those games and having that be a pride thing. But the Ravens are a good team with great depth, and they are, generally speaking, in-game decision making very good. There was a really good tweet. I think it was from Mitchell Schwartz former Kansas City and Cleveland right tackle, who said, why get another look at Zach Wilson on a 4th and 2 when you can get your punt team a rep? I do think that is a little funny that the Jets, opted to punt on that first drive as opposed to putting Wilson back out there. But old habits die hard in football, and that is certainly a habit that has seemed to have died difficultly. By the way, we're back in the office in Atlanta here. Last week, I apologize for not being able to put up a new episode. I was in Philadelphia teaching a class at Wharton. I appreciate all of you for your patience there. But at the same time, like as many people have said, my good friend that runs Texans Cap, makes fun of the fact that there is no, we're still putting in some of the decorations here back here. Maybe I'll put up some decorations by the time next week's podcast is there. But for right now, you just have an empty screen behind me here. But it'll make the Immaculate Grid that we do later that much better. Some additional league notes. The Bears, they needed to get up to the spending floor, so they went out and signed Yannick Ngakuoue. They went ahead and signed Mercedes Lewis, so 2 veteran players. Lewis is, I joked about this, but like when I was a college tight end in 2005, Mercedes Lewis was graduating from UCLA. Like I was like trying to emulate my game after him. Of course, I wasn't 6'8" or had the athleticism he had, but he's been around the league that long to where your host Eric Eager of the Circa Sports show was a tight end in college at the same time he was. He's still playing. I do like that kind of move when you have a quarterback who's kind of a run guy. Although I will say we do have to be a little bit careful about grouping Justin Fields in as a runner with like Lamar Jackson, where Lamar Jackson back when they were with or back when he was with the Ravens and they had, the Andrews and the Hursts and the Nick Boyles and all those tight ends. Lamar Jackson, the majority of his running yards come on design plays. So the tight end benefits more there than one would in Chicago, where majority of Fields' rushing yards come on scrambles. So that's something to be cognizant of. It's different than it is in Baltimore, or was in Baltimore, now that Monken is there as opposed to Roman. But that's something to consider here when you are thinking about the Bears. The Ngakuoue signing, look, I got a little bit of flack on Twitter for saying that I thought that the $10.5 million was reasonable for Ngakuoue because, look, there you have to face facts. After he's a Pro Bowler in 2017 when that Jacksonville defense was the league's best along with Minnesota. That was his best year as far as sacks and everything is concerned. But he has 19.5 sacks the last 2 years. That is almost as many as the Bears had last year. The Bears had 20 sacks as a team last year. Yannick Ngakuoue got 9.5. I don't think that he's going to come in and be a difference maker in the sense that they're going from being, like he's not going to move the season win total at all for the Bears, which is sitting at 7.5. But what it I think does do is if things do go right for that team, let's say the offense is good, I think being able to pressure the quarterback at the end of games it is going to be important for that team. So I like the signing. I think 10.5 would be rich if the Bears, if that money meant more to the Bears. Bears could have rolled it over if they were above the spending limit, but they were not above the spending limit. So they did have to spend that money. And so they spend that money on Ngakuoue and Mercedes Lewis to help this team. Ngakuoue, always sort of a better secondary edge player than he is a primary edge player. And largely because his pressure rates are closer to 10%, 11%, less so than we talked about Danielle Hunter on the show. He's less near that like 12, 13, 14, 15% pressure rate that you need to be truly elite. But he has been able to sustain a very good pressure to sack ratio, meaning he finishes better than a lot of defensive ends. And even though that is generally speaking for most players noise, for some players like Chandler Jones and Ngakuoue specifically, that finishing rate has been stable over time. So not a terrible signing for the Bears. I do know he's terrible against the run. That has been shown in the Pro Football Focus grades forever. But I'm more willing to take a pass rush first guy who's terrible against the run at edge, of course, than defensive tackle. And if things, he might not even be a player that plays every single snap for them. So I don't really mind necessarily that deal. Speaking of deals, Cam Jordan signed a 2-year, $27.5 million APY deal with the New Orleans Saints. This is another one where probably giving him money up front, probably prorating it over some years that are voids, probably kicking the can down the road again. And look, like, he's one of the best players to ever play for the Saints. One of the best pass rushers. You put him up there with Pat Swilling. You put him up there with Reggie Jackson as you know, some of the best players to ever play for the Saints rushing the quarterback. Son of Steve Jordan, probably one of a top 5 father-son combo in the history of the NFL, both multiple Pro Bowls for both guys. Very, very good in the booth. Just an overall great player. You worry about the Saints, right? Win total 9.5. You go to sumersports.com. There, this past Monday, there is a preview on the NFC South. You worry about them because if all of those players over 30 years old, Demario Davis, a 4-time All-Pro consecutively, Cam Jordan, you know, Derek Carr, you know, Michael Thomas, you know, kind of older. I actually have to look up his age, but chronologically maybe not as old, but from the standpoint of getting hurt all the time, he is older. Tyrann Mathieu also, like, you look along that team and there's a lot of players who are been great for a long time that all have to stay great for this team to make sense. And even though they did get 2 first-rounders last year in Olave, who's terrific, Trevor Penning, who hasn't shown anything yet, really, they have to stay healthy for this thing to stay afloat. And it would be a shame if it, you know, it was brittle enough for them not to win this division that they've clearly gone all in to win, with teams like Tampa Bay and Carolina down, and a team like Atlanta fledgling, but still probably a little bit of a ways away from truly being in that sort of elite class as far as competition is concerned. So I you know, whatever. I mean, they've committed to this. Their ownership is clearly willing to spend. We've got a great question here from Beat Gamer, and I actually do want to talk about this distinction, because this is kind of like, look, we're in a very and there's the, you know, over the cap, and then there's, you know, guys like Spielberger or Texans. You know, Texans Cap is a great, if you want to follow a really good Substack. It's worth the money, I think, is Texans Cap, even if you're not a Texans fan. Like, we're so much better at understanding. We're so much better at understanding the cap now than we were before, but we still have like drastic misunderstandings of where the cap is. And I think Beat Gamer is a very, you know, very good follow here, but he says, when do the Saints just bite the bullet, rebound, and stop moving the money into the future? I think these instruments that these teams have created, void years, and just, you know, void years specifically, but also just being, you know, willing to pay a lot of money up front to players, that has curbed a lot of this whole, like, kick the can down the road. When is the timer going to go off? For more conventional front offices like Cincinnati, like Kansas City, which like to pay as they go, it's a problem, right? If you constantly, you look at, for example, the Philadelphia Eagles cap table on over the cap, for example, you look at their top like 10 to 12 players, and they're all on veteran minimum paragraph 5s. And then like everything is prorated bonuses. And that's fine if you have an ownership that's willing to consistently pay that way. The Vikings are trending this way as well. We just saw that with Danielle Hunter this past week. And if ownerships are willing to do that, then it's sustainable, right? Because, you prorate that money, and relative to the cap, that money becomes less and less valuable year in and year out. The problem is if you get a run of bad luck, you are going to be paying for players who are not useful and at some point, if you don't plan it out well, you are going to be paying for players who aren't useful. Look, Michael Thomas, if he didn't have the contract structure that he has had, would not be on the Saints right now. The reason that he's still on the Saints, and the reason that, they do a great job. The guys, Nick Underhill and his team at New Orleans Football, like, the reason that they're trying to hype up Michael Thomas is like the Saints have no choice but to have Michael Thomas on the books this year because of the way that they've done it. The teams that pay as you go, they can get rid of players more readily, but they don't, for example, necessarily have ownership buy-in to like do a Chris Jones deal right now, for example. That's what Kansas City's dealing with. So it's interesting, and I think any analysis of the cap really does have to take into account whether a team is a cash spender like Cleveland, like New Orleans, like Philadelphia, like Minnesota, or it's a pay-as-you-go type of franchise like Tampa Bay used to be, like like Kansas City, like Cincinnati. And it's sometimes a team's a blend of both. And sometimes teams break their rules when the opportunities arise. And I think that that's what's really cool about the salary cap, and what's really cool about front offices that are a little bit, they know what they're doing. Jacqueline Davidson, for example, in Tampa Bay, does a really good job. The Bucks right now are paying $75 million in dead cap this year. $35 million of it's Brady. So it wasn't just Brady. That team was a pay-as-you-go team all the way until it was Brady, and then they just decided, okay, let's do this because we're trying to win the Super Bowl. And I can't actually blame them, but because they're not inherently a cash team, the party ends at some point. And you have seasons like now where Tampa Bay has a 6.5 win total on the betting markets, whereas I can see the Browns, and I can maybe less so, but I can see specifically the Eagles, with how much cachet Howie Roseman has. I could see the Eagles doing this whole bonus prorate, bonus prorate, bonus prorate. I think that the bonus prorate thing, if your ownership is willing to pay for it and you have stability, can be something that happens in perpetuity until they obviously change the cap, or there is something like a pandemic that decreases the cap space. And that was like the whammy that hit the Eagles in 2020 and 2021 was you had the reduction in the cap size. So I guess this is all to say is, like, if you plan it out and you're lucky, above average luck, you can kind of do these things and have them work out. And it also, I talked about this on Matthew Collar's podcast, Purple Insider, on Substack. By the way, you should subscribe to that. He's one of my best friends, and he's also just terrific at it. But it also probably helps, deals that are shorter, right? So like back when Kirk Cousins signed with Minnesota 3 years, I think it was $87 million at the time, fully guaranteed. It was a bad deal because it just wasn't smooth enough. I know Kwesi's talked about using that language. It wasn't smooth enough to allow the Vikings to have the cash to pounce when the opportunities were there. And so they had stuff like almost having to release Riley Reif when they traded for Yannick Ngakuoue. They haven't been able to spend big in free agency. But now with these void years, like the Vikings can go up, for example, and give Hunter a 1 year, $17 million deal and have the cap hits sort of spread out over 2 years instead of one. That really helps them. Or, Marcus Davenport, 1 year, $13 million. Like historically, that would be $13 million against the cap. But if you put enough void years on it, it can be a certain amount of the cap this year and then a certain amount the following year. Or, and it also gives you an opportunity, like, historically those long-term deals, you would be with that, you would be tied to that player. Now you can let them go, have it prorate, have it accelerate up to the particular year their contract voids, or you can sign them to an extension, and those prorations happen over the course of many years as opposed to one. So it's an interesting discussion, but the cap is evolving, and I think it's evolving faster than the general population understanding of the cap is growing. And so it can provide some problems. The Saints also had some other news. Alvin Kamara was suspended for 3 games to start the season, violating league conduct policy. This was a situation, again, good on the league for cracking down on some of these. Charles Omenihu also suspended for 6 games for Kansas City. That's a big blow for the Chiefs because obviously Chris Jones hasn't been in camp. From what I can tell, and I don't have, I don't have a ton of inside information here, but I think that the ask and bid price, the bid and ask price are just too far apart for these two. I think the Chiefs probably, as we looked at those contracts, every single secondary defensive interior contract that was coming in, we're looking, 23, 23 and a half, 24 for Quinnen Williams. And we're like, okay, Jones is just going to slide in at 25. But as I said on a video last week, Jones played like Aaron Donald last year. And so, he's maybe rightfully asking for what Donald makes, which is in that $31 million range. And it's simply not, it's simply probably not tenable for the, it's simply probably not tenable for the Chiefs to do that. But he's certainly within his rights to ask for it. So there's certainly some separation there. I think Jones probably ends up coming back after they break camp. I think the Chiefs, they probably don't trade him because I think that they don't really have anybody to replace him. But I don't think he sits out the season. I think he comes in, and internally they plan for a future without him, but they played the season with him. And that's fine. They won the Super Bowl last year. They won 2 in the last 4. Like, this is a season where they are favored. I don't know if they should be favored, but I don't necessarily know like if this is a must win the Super Bowl season in the Chiefs' mind as much as it maybe was last year for Buffalo or teams like that. So a lot of interesting league news and a lot of stuff, to noodle on. Just before we do an Immaculate Grid and before we answer some questions from the listeners, I do want to pump up our sponsor, Circa Sports, because Circa Sports at the end of this month, they will be signing players up for their Millions competition and for their Survivor competition. 14 million in prizes. It's a great game. My former colleague at PFF, Ben Brown, and I have played in it multiple times. It's a lot of fun, and Circa Sports is the cream of the crop when it comes to American sports books. They take big limits. They make sharp lines. They move lines on action as opposed to limiting players. It's a tremendous sports book, and it's a tremendous experience too. Myself, Tage, Seth, Parker Fleming will be out there from the 24th through the 27th. In case you guys want to come out and meet us, we will be interviewing some people in the industry. We'll also be interviewing with people from the industry, including our friends at Vegas Sports and Information Network, which has their studio inside of Circa Sports. We will also be utilizing the Stadium Swim, which is one of the coolest experiences in all of Vegas. A sport, basically a place where you can watch sports and also, sit in the pool, and just a fantastic experience. So circasports.com. Go ahead and look at that. You have to sign up in Vegas, but you can play anywhere, and it's a fantastic experience. Okay, let's get this thing on with this Immaculate Grid here. So I'm going to go ahead and present. I'm going to share my screen here. I don't do this much on the air. Here's Immaculate Grid just to show you. We go ahead and get on with it. We share this tab. Going to my other computer to make sure that we have this loaded up. Okay, so we have the Immaculate Grid. It's looking like I'm kind of. Let's make sure that everybody can see that. Okay, everybody can see the Immaculate Grid here. We have some interesting ones. We have Buffalo, Green Bay. For the podcast listeners, we have Buffalo, Green Bay, and a 1,000, and then that's on the Y here. We have on the X here, Pittsburgh. Actually, sorry, on the X we have Buffalo, Green Bay, and a 1,000-yard season. On the Y we have Pittsburgh, and we also have San Francisco and Chicago. So that's going to be how we're going to have to do this here. I like to go through and pick throughout here. I like to go ahead and pick the stats first. So we look at Pittsburgh Steelers, who have had a 1,000-yard season. This can be a little bit tricky. There are some, so obviously, interesting ones would be like Lynn Swan, and Lance Stallworth, I think. Those are kind of from the 70s and the 80s and 90s. It was really barren for them as far as, receivers for 1,000-yard seasons. You could go Hines Ward, but again, I think a lot of people are going to pick that. You can go Antonio Brown. Similarly, I'm thinking when I think 1,000-yard season, Beat Gamer says Antonio. Sorry, it would be Bryant. I'm trying to think of Martavis Bryant. I don't think I'm going to go with Martavis Bryant. I think that one's sneaky. Yancey Thigpen was one I was thinking of, formerly, in the 90s, but I'm actually not sure he had a 1,000-yard year. Nate Washington was one I know he's had a 1,000-yard season, but I don't know if it was with Tennessee or with Pittsburgh. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to go with a safe one. I'm going to go with Mike Wallace, who I think is going to be. I think Mike Wallace, okay, 6%. So not terrible, not a terrible showing there. Not less than 1%, which we're going to try to ding for on a couple of these here. Chicago, this one. Now it's funny. I was just watching. I tweeted out a picture last night called "This is Analytics." I tweeted out a picture of a Vikings-Bears game from a Thursday night, 1994. And again, people ask me, how do you come up with these? Jeff Graham was a wide receiver on that team, and Jeff Graham I think, is going to be a Bear who had a 1,000-yard season at point, and that's going to be 0.03. I think I'm the only one that picked Jeff Graham, a wide receiver, and he had his 1,000-yard year, if I remember, either 94 or 95, with Eric Kramer putting up like a singularly. So Bears have never had a 4,000-yard year, but if you look at Eric Kramer from 1995, one of the best seasons. That was the 95 year where like Scott Mitchell blew up, Warren Moon. Everybody had great years, and randomly Eric Kramer had a great year. So that Jeff Graham of the Bears. Somebody said Curtis Conway, and that's a good one too. Curtis Conway had a great year in that 95 season, but Curtis Conway was also a first round pick, and I think that one is one that I think more people will take. Now the 49ers are interesting. 1,000-yard year for the 49ers. Let's think about this for a second here. You have you obviously have Jerry Rice, you have Terrell Owens, you have Deebo Samuel, of course. There's a couple of guys. So like I think about somebody like who's it? Brandon Lloyd, but I don't think Brandon Lloyd had 1,000 yards until he went to Denver. I think about J.J. Stokes, but I actually don't think J.J. Stokes ever had 1,000-yard year. I think he was usurped by Terrell Owens. This one is a kind of a Mike Wallace-like one, but I'm going to go with the guy who caught the game-winning touchdown pass in the Super Bowl against the Bengals in '88. I'm going to go with John Taylor. It's just a 4%, but I know Taylor had a 1,000-yard year in '91. I just watched the game between the Falcons and Niners in '91. I know he had one that year. I think maybe '93 as well, and maybe '89, but he had a couple, and he was kind of a streaky number 2 receiver next to Jerry Rice during all the Super Bowl years. So we have John Taylor. Somebody very good beat gamer said Anquan Bolden, which that's a good one as well. That was one I would have thought about. Bolden is probably going to be a pretty popular person in Immaculate Grid because he's played for a lot of teams. Okay, now here's my strategy on guys that have played for multiple teams. And here's my strategy. Kickers and quarterbacks. Kickers and backup quarterbacks is always where I go, and it's always where people forget. So like, for example, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Green Bay have all had this one backup quarterback named Mike Tomczak. He also played, I think, for Cleveland. I've used him before. Mike Tomczak won something like 16 of his first 18 starts or something crazy in Chicago, backing up Jim McMahon. So I have that one that can work in like multiple squares. Green Bay and Chicago is one that's actually easier than people think because they're within division. Tomczak works there. Adrian Amos works there. I think Adrian Amos is going to be somebody that a lot of people pick. Steve McMichael, who, by the way, our thoughts and are with Steve McMichael, Mongo, who is currently fighting ALS in the hospital. He was actually a Green Bay Packer in 1994 after being a Chicago Bear for their Super Bowl winning season, one of the better interior defensive linemen. But here's the one, and this goes with my kickers here. He is the current punter of the Green Bay Packers, and he was the punter of the Bears before that. Pat O'Donnell, we're going to get under 1% there with Pat O'Donnell, which means we can use Mike Tomczak as the Packers and Steelers quarterback there. 8% feels a little high. I feel like I've gotten skunked a little bit there. Not great. Not one that I particularly – I don't like that one being so high. Okay, let's think about some other players. Now, again, backup quarterbacks. This is one that I don't think people are going to think about, but I've used him in a number of these because he was a very big journeyman. He played in replacement games for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1987. He was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. He was a Pro Bowler for the Kansas City Chiefs, but he got his start really in San Francisco, getting some backup starts behind Steve Young in '91, and he was the backup quarterback for Brett Favre in the Packers' second Super Bowl season. This is Chiefs legend Steve Bono. Steve Bono, 8% gets in the middle there. So that's a little bit higher than I would have thought as well, but that's one I quite like. Steve Bono in the middle of the Immaculate Grid square there. So we're 6 for 6. We have a few more left. Bills, Steelers. This one's tougher than you think because the Steelers were and here's the other thing about the Immaculate Grid is it's sort of perfect for my generation because we kind of remember football right around the 90s. Like I was born in 1986, so you kind of are like coming of age during free agency. But like anything before that, it's like kind of rare for a guy to switch teams, right? And because there wasn't free agency until 1993, there wasn't a salary cap until 94. And weirdly, of course, Buffalo was a dynasty. 4 straight Super Bowls, all losses in 4 Super Bowl losses in the 90s, and then the Steelers were kind of a house for basically all the time after that. So there aren't that many guys that do both, but the one that I thought of for both of these teams is a tight end with an amazing name, and that is Jay Remersma. I think Remersma got 1 year in for Pittsburgh in like 05, and prior to that he was Buffalo. That is to not be confused with another tight end from Buffalo with an amazing name called Pete Metzelaars. I don't think Metzelaars played for the Steelers. I could be wrong, but Jay Remersma played for both. Remersma was a tight end, I think, when Roethlisberger was starting out. Okay. Niners Bills is not coming to me immediately, so I'm going to skip to Chicago Buffalo. This is, again, back to my backup quarterbacks and kickers. I'm going to go with a guy who played briefly in Buffalo, did more of his time in Chicago, and that's Shane Matthews. Shane Matthews was a quarterback for the Bears when they were doing their comeback kids season of 2001. But I think he finished his career in Buffalo as a backup to, I think it was Edwards or Lossman, but Matthews wins the day there. And then you have Chicago versus. So now, okay, so we're 8 for 8. We have one more here. This is San Francisco Buffalo. So again, this is one where it's tough because in the 80s, Buffalo was ascending. You have, by the way, another Buffalo Chicago one could have been another backup quarterback, Todd Collins, who famously was awful for the Bears in 1 year as a backup, but was the quarterback that took over for Jim Kelly. That's another one if you want. Here, your question, beat gamer, was Nathan Peterman ever on San Fran? I don't think so. And you have to be careful with these backups because, especially preseason, because you don't want to have guys that like had a cup of coffee with the team and then didn't actually get in a game. They do actually have to have gotten into a game. So that's tough. San Francisco and Buffalo were both good at the same time. Like in 1992, they played the first ever game that did not involve a punt. The Bills went into San Francisco and won. That was one of the 2 losses the Niners had that year. So that was that, so all this is to say, not a lot of guys are going to be switching those 2 teams, right? Like both of those teams kind of like, the Niners won the Super Bowl in 88 and 89. The Bills made the Super Bowl 90 through 93, and then the Niners won the Super Bowl in 94. Jim Kelly retires in 96. Steve Young retires in 99. So like it's kind of tough to get a player there. There is one like high profile player I do remember that switched from one team to the next, and he was a humongous bust, and that's Nate Clements. The reason I remember Nate Clements is as a member of the Niners, he returned a blocked field goal against the Vikings in that famous Brett Favre game where he hit Greg Lewis in the back of the end zone. And Nate Clements, was otherwise awful for the 49ers, but did have a touchdown in that game. So we get a score of 30 here. I don't know if that's good or that's bad. It's about 6 times the average of the average score, but I'd like to get into triple digits here. But for everybody in the chat, I'm interested in what you guys think of this little exercise here. Frank Gore was an option. I forgot Frank Gore. Dan Bodine comes in here with a good one. I think Frank Gore would have been more chosen than Nate Clements, but that's absolutely right. I forgot about Frank Gore. He did play. Frank Gore beat out LaShawn McCoy the year that LaShawn McCoy ended up going and playing for Kansas City in their Super Bowl years. So that was a lot of fun. I'll probably try to do that as much as people want. It's been fun to like kind of wake up in the morning and do that one. And honestly, the hardest part about this was waiting until now to do it, because obviously it's fun when you're standing in line at the coffee shop or something to be able to pick up one of those games. The Fantasy Daddy has another one that's usually pretty good as well. Yahtzee says Greg Lewis, Vikings legend, absolutely. Absolutely Vikings legend, Chiefs legend now, as I believe the running backs coach. He left, I think, to go to the Commanders to be there to work with Eric Bieniemy. But a very fun time there. Before we go, I do want to take. We did talk about salary cap for a little bit. There was a really cool discussion there from Dan and Beat Gamer and Yahtzee and so forth in the chat about the salary cap. If looking at sort of the comments here, yeah, I mean, Yahtzee, your player recollection is saying I was born in 1987. Look, my former college girlfriend Haley once said if I could ever monetize all the knowledge in my head, God bless me, and I've been able to. So it's been pretty fun. But yeah, I watch a lot of old games, and it's weird. Like, I don't watch that many before I was born. Like, it's basically back to the 87 strike year where I'll watch a game, but my wheelhouse is kind of mid 90s, NFC Central, kind of where I grew up. And I've gone back, since, I got married and became a Chiefs fan. I kind of have gone back and watched almost every single Chiefs game all the way till back when I was born. So like it sticks, and obviously working in sports obviously helps. So this was a lot of fun. Just a couple of announcements. Like, we hopefully by next week we'll have a pretty solid update to our website. We had some really good content there this week. Sean Syed wrote an awesome article on Cover One to the point where I think Thomas Dimitrov, he said one of the best pieces he's ever read about the topic. It was kind of an interesting discussion that we had internally about, kind of scouts who are more like evaluating players versus coaches who are more evaluating schemes. Sean and Tej are going to have some stuff cooking up fairly soon. We are going to have some fantasy football stuff as well, as Lee Ollie said, on the website as well. There's going to be some cool stuff. All of those numbers that you're seeing in the articles. So on Monday, it's going to be the AFC East that we're going to talk about as a division preview. We talked about the NFC South this past week. All of those simulation numbers, they're going to be on the website for you to look at every week. So if you want to, make futures, make futures leans and stuff like that, you certainly can. We'll have some game previews as well. That won't be part of the first release, but it'll be part of the second. And then we'll have more podcasts. So if you've enjoyed Parker Fleming, if you've enjoyed Sean Syed and Chase Sheth, there'll be more of them coming in. And then myself and Thomas we'll be back to 2 shows a week coming basically early September. So a lot of fun stuff, a lot of exciting stuff on Sumer Sports coming this fall. We really enjoy breaking down football for all of you, and we can't wait to do it some more. So yeah, this has been the Friday episode of the Sumer Sports Show. We really appreciate you. Again, Circa Sports, if you want to go ahead and play some of those contests this fall. We hope to see you out there in Vegas at the end of the month. So for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.